This is Talk It Out, the Women's Agenda podcast. Tune in for your weekly download on the latest news, trends and ideas affecting your career or your business. Here's your host, Angela Priestley.
Hello and welcome to the Women's Agenda podcast. I am here in the studio with Georgie Dent. How are you, Georgie?
I'm good, thank you.
And it's just us two today holding the fort, so much to talk about. We are questioning whether we'll have enough conversation between us to manage, but we seem to every other morning of the week. So
Exactly.
So why not? But today we will be discussing the glass cliff phenomenon affecting women, particularly in the context of Me Too and some of the misbehaving men who lost their jobs and where those replacements went and whether they were female or not. We'll also talk a little bit about Princess Markle. I don't know the correct...
The Duchess of Sussex.
Is that how... Are you allowed to refer to her as her full name? I don't know. I get trapped on this.
I don't actually know about that either. But I mean, Kate Middleton still gets called Kate Middleton at times. But I mean, I know technically her title is the Duchess of Sussex.
Okay, we will be talking the Duchess of Sussex.
So I wonder also actually whether she's changed her name.
That's something for us to look up in the course of the show. I feel that she hasn't, and that has come up as quite a thing in terms of her being a truly feminist princess, apparently. But
if there is such a thing.
If there is such a thing. So much to discuss, and then at the end we'll also be sharing some recommendations. And also just a reminder that we do publish every day, and we are free and female run and female owned, and you can access our content at womensagenda.com.au, and you can also subscribe to our daily email, which comes to you just before lunch there as well. So, Georgie, a piece that was doing the rounds on the weekend, which you've also written about today, was the data from the New York Times that looked at the 201 prominent men in the US who have lost their jobs since the Harvey Weinstein story broke just over a year ago. 124 of those 201 men were replaced, and 54 of those replacements were women, which led many people to say, well, this is great, almost half of the replacements were female. But you asked the question, why not more than half?
Well, why not at least half? As a starting point, because I think there were 54 women and 70 men that have gone into the replacement roles, and there are a number of the 201 positions that haven't been filled yet. But so that means women, of those who've been replaced, women make up 43% of appointments. And as you and I sort of spoke about earlier today, the inevitable question is, if women cannot get parity of opportunity in this circumstance, so when men have lost their positions because of public allegations of sexual misconduct, whether it's harassment, abuse, whatever, if we can't even get 50-50 women in that setting, when will we get them? And I think the other thing that's interesting is and this isn't new information, but part of the dynamic that has enabled the sexual harassment to take place and for it to sort of be protected for so long is the power imbalance. So often the case has been, as it was with Harvey Weinstein, the person who's perpetrating the alleged abuse is far more powerful than the people that he is harassing, abusing, assaulting. And it's the power imbalance that has sort of enabled the abuse to happen in the first place, but then has sort of perpetuated the silence around it and maintained protection for the powerful person. And so I look at it simply and you think, well, if you were an organisation looking at changing the culture that has enabled that sort of misconduct to take place in your organisation, and in these cases we're talking about people who've lost their jobs because of it, and we all know people don't dismiss anyone lightly. So these men, it's probably fairly safe to say that the allegations of misconduct are credible. And if in that instance they're not looking at perhaps we need to even up the gender balance in our leadership team, in our management team, then what would make them start to think about the gender parity?
I know. I just think it's shocking that we can't get to 50% there. But then also, you might look at it the other way and say 43% is actually very, very good compared to replacements that occur in other situations. So the replacements, say, of CEOs on the ASX 200. I mean, obviously the figures are so small for women in these leadership positions that to get 43%, these are, I assume, Hollywood studios and various other things, very powerful things in the entertainment industry, Hollywood, media. Are there any other major industries within that list that had the
Well, I think it was across the board.
Okay, across the board of really influential...
Yes, so influential roles. So whether that was in politics, whether it was in business, in entertainment.
So some of them haven't been replaced, which might make you wonder what happened to that organisation, institution. I mean, in the Weinstein Company that went bankrupt, there was like a group of women who were looking to buy it out, which would have been really interesting in terms of shifting that power imbalance itself. But this also leads to the fact that, I mean, in this situation, these organisations, reputation damage, issues going on internally about who knew what, why people didn't take action faster, issues going on with some of them being sued potentially as well from suppliers or distributors or other people expecting business out of them. It would be a really, really crappy job to take on that sort of leadership job, a leadership position at that time.
Yes, I think it's probably fair to say that it's not, I mean, maybe this isn't true, but I think it's probably it's hardly the dream scenario that you might hope to put yourself in sort of in a professional sense, because I think the dynamics, I mean, depending on the individual but in a lot of cases, these are really senior people. So presumably that hole is going to be big to fill. And then you've got, it would be inevitable that there would be a whole lot of hostilities around what happened, what didn't happen, why it didn't happen fast enough, why has it happened at all. And so managing that, I mean, I think it's probably fair to say that it is a little bit of one of those glass cliff scenarios, which we see that often the time that women do get appointed to become CEO in an organisation is when things are so dire that the board decides, well, let's try anything, let's try a woman.
Yeah, finally let's try a woman, when the chance of failure is also probably at its highest as well.
And so, I mean, in that regard, I was thinking about these figures. In some ways you think, well, 43%, I mean, it's better than less than 43%, but then also perhaps it is better than if it had been the case that everyone thought, right, well, let's just put a woman in here to fix
let's
all
get
of
women
these
to fix this entire
mess.
Yes.
But then also I do wonder whether maybe, yes, it is a mess, but maybe putting women in those roles is sort of, unlike the glass cliff scenario, in the research when a company is sort of in dire straits, in this, when it's sort of cultural dire straits, perhaps...
it is a quicker fix to the issue.
To put in a lot of women.
Yeah.
But then I am always hesitant to sort of say I don't think women need to be brilliant, heroic leaders in every instance who are, it's not about the fact that they're better or worse than men, but I think that given the nature of this beast, and because we have seen that it is in the vast majority of cases it's males who've been perpetrating this sort of assault and harassment, well, shouldn't more women just be put in there? Just to balance it out and to give create a different dynamic.
When it's a cultural issue, that's where you can very much say that they've said, hey, what we've been doing over and over again isn't working here. We do need something very, very different. We do need to take that risk or whatever it is to really try and shift the status quo, to really address the cultural issue. And also maybe from, say, an investor's point of view or something, they might see a woman in that role in that situation and say, well, this is a real positive move forward. It looks like they're really keen on addressing these issues.
It's also, I mean, one of the other things so it was the New York Times that did this analysis of the 201 men that have so far lost their jobs, and then they looked at all of the replacements. And in the article that went with that, they had quoted a female who's quite a high-profile female executive, and she sort of said, this has sort of changed the dynamic a little bit. It used to be that women were seen as risky because they might go and, heaven forbid, have a baby, whereas now there are organisations who are starting to look at men as being risky in that they may create these problems. And I thought, isn't that horrendous that, having a baby, which is, to be fair,
part of these risks.
I mean, it's a pretty discreet, it happens, but it's also, it doesn't end a person's life. It doesn't sort of create this ongoing legal ramifications. Potentially, as we've seen in a lot of good organisations around the world, it is possible for a woman to work, have a baby, return to work, be an incredibly productive, valuable member of the team, and everyone's happy. That's completely different to the risk that I think organisations are now alive to, which is, well, look at the damage that is done when you have individuals abuse their power. And we've seen that individuals are inclined to abuse their power and they haven't been held to account. And I mean, I think that's where this is interesting with the replacements, because you think, well, is it the case that in these organisations there was just one bad apple and they just behaved badly and no one knew about it? I think far more likely what we have seen is that someone has behaved badly. It has been known about because complaints have been made, whether or not they've been sort of legal settlements have been reached and then everyone's been asked to move on, whatever it is, there has been sort of an orchestrated attempt at concealment.
There has, exactly. And also there's been that orchestrated attempt at concealment, especially in the case if somebody is seen too brilliant or amazing that they can't be replaced. As I imagine that was sort of the sense and the feeling with Weinstein, and we've seen it in so many other examples also.
Well, I think a little bit with Bill Cosby as well. There's a similar, I mean, I know it's different because Bill Cosby didn't have a company that he was leading and he wasn't sort of, but again, we have seen it with a lot of the men who have sort of eventually had their careers derailed. You know, for a long time, people just thought they were too. You know, it's like they used to say about the banks. You know, they're too big to fail. I think a lot of these individuals were seen as being too successful and too brilliant to possibly, you know, be held to account for their behaviour.
The genius issue, apparently. And then, I mean, leaving outside of harassment and outside of assault and those sorts of things, there's also the case of, you know, that some organisations will put up with jerks being around, you know, again, because they are considered too brilliant. So these people who can just be they can just cause havoc amongst the culture and just be horrible and not be able to manage appropriately. But, you know, their genius is so wonderful that they are accepted. But so I hope that we see less of that going on as well. But I did want to just talk a little bit more about the glass cliff phenomenon, you know, this idea that women are more likely than men to get these leadership positions during periods of crisis. And I saw an interesting piece, and I was, you know, thinking about this at the time, and I'm sure you've thought about this with Julie Bishop. Did she possibly dodge a bit of a bullet in the leadership spill in the fact that you know, obviously the Liberal Party in such dire straits, and for now, things are not looking good into the next election. Is she better off going to the backbench and possibly making her comeback later on? Was she aware of the idea that this was a bit of a glass cliff situation? We see it with Theresa May as well in Britain, where I mean, I just don't think there would be a worse job in the world than having to negotiate Brexit. You cannot win there. You cannot,
particularly not when you weren't part of the team orchestrating that.
Yep, the Remainers dislike what you're doing. Exactly. The people, the Exiters, don't think you're going far enough. You cannot win there. Obviously, a famous one is Marissa Mayer, Yahoo's sixth CEO in 5 years. And she was replaced by a man. And the replacement situation also led me to some other research, and I hope I can find it now. I wrote it in my notes here. So research based on the Fortune 500 found that over a 15-year period, of the 608 CEO transitions that occurred during that time, just 4 of them were women. So just 4 women replaced women in that situation. So there is this sense that people will try a woman, and often that woman might be given a really crappy task. And again, there's plenty of research that backs this for a company that is in financial difficulties, and then they're not being replaced by a woman, and that happened with Yahoo. So Georgie, I mean, do we need to be more aware of this, and should we say no? I mean, I'm saying this at the big leadership positions, but it goes down to, you know, any kind of work situation. If you can see it's not going to work out, that you've been given something that's really, really difficult and the chances of success are quite low, should you say no, or should you just try and be the person who can maybe get it done?
Well, look, that's an interesting question, I think, and I hadn't actually thought of I hadn't thought of it in this immediate context about Julie Bishop, but I think that, I think it's slightly moot because she wasn't given the opportunity anyway, but perhaps...
And she did put her hand up for the opportunity, so
but I think perhaps it is a huge blessing in disguise that she has been able to sort of step back at the moment. I think that was natural anyway, given her, you know, relationship with Malcolm Turnbull and the way it all played out. But I think, you know, that would have been I don't envy Scott Morrison currently, and I don't think anyone who went into that position was going to have an easy run. And I think potentially, strategically for Julie Bishop, but also more broadly for women in leadership, we might be better off not having a female with this particular poison chalice that I would call the Liberal leadership in the second half of 2018. And I think it's interesting. You think about the number of female CEOs in the ASX 200, you know, there's less than 10. We all know, you know, there's more men called Andrew running companies in the ASX 200 than there are women. The numbers are tiny. So if you, as a female, if you are offered the opportunity to lead an ASX 200 company, what are the chances of you saying no? Because if you don't say yes, then those numbers are never going to change. But at the same time, is that the right thing to take over? If you are appointed in circumstances where it is a very clear glass cliff, then I don't know, perhaps you are better off not taking it. I think on an individual level, I think it is important and quite valuable to know the power of saying no. When something isn't going to work for you. And I think it probably depends on you as an individual about whether or not saying yes to an opportunity, even when it's going to be really challenging. Do you know what I mean?
It might depend on your circumstances at the time, but also it might depend on, I guess, how, if the chance of failure is so high, how you'll personally be able to recover, or how you'll personally and professionally be able to recover that. If it can be positioned in such a way that people see that. Yeah. People see that in your industry. People see that in your organisation. People know that you're given a really difficult task. And, then there's the slim chance that maybe you will be successful as well, which we've seen as well. So in various cases.
Yeah, that's true. I'm just thinking at the moment of Deborah Thomas, who, was the CEO of Ardent Leisure. And that was a particularly tricky period that she oversaw that company. And the scrutiny that she was under from the minute she took that job was unprecedented. And I mean, I'm sure there would be people who say, "Oh, that's no more or no less than any other, male CEO." But it was very gendered. There was the cartoon of her in bed with the board member. There was definite sexism in the commentary that she got. And I think it's like when we had Julia Gillard as the Prime Minister, because there are so few females in those leadership positions. They're so visible. They are scrutinised more than their male counterparts are. And I think that is sort of the vicious cycle for women, because until there's more women in those positions, and then there can be less scrutiny on each individual because it's less of a big deal, then part of the role that you have is going to be how do I personally withstand the scrutiny? And that's why taking over a company at a particularly dire point in time, I think for a female, is even more of a challenge.
So would you do it?
See, I don't know. Would you?
I don't know, but I'm also not of that level of being a CEO of an ASX-listed major organisation.
I haven't had any offers recently. I mean, at least not for the last month. No one has offered me to run a company. But you and I were talking earlier about sort of what motivates you at work. And I think that if you were offered I can't run a company, so that's just a given. But if I was given an amazing opportunity in a job that I was passionate about, I think I would say yes. I wouldn't say no just because I thought it would be hard.
Yeah. If you really believed in the organisation, if you really believed that a turnaround was possible, even if the risk of failure was high, if you were willing to accept those risks because you needed to give it a shot, then you can see why you would say yes. Because you might regret it otherwise.
If someone asked me to take over AMP currently, I wouldn't do it.
Oh, you wouldn't say yes? Oh. No. How much would they have to pay you? Or there's no amount?
There's no amount, I don't think.
Yeah.
No.
This is a commercial break for Work It Out. We'll be back in a moment. But if you're interested in being a sponsor for Work It Out or Women's Agenda, just drop us a line and let us know. That's womensagenda.com.au.
All right, so we'll move on now to Princess Markle. Princess Markle?
The Duchess?
The Duchess. Oh, sorry, the Duchess.
Of Sussex.
Just the Duchess?
The Duchess of Sussex.
Okay. The Duchess would be like Fergie from the Black Eyed Peas, right? So,
okay.
So
exactly.
So the Duchess. And on my note, I've just written that. But we're making the point. So I haven't been following a huge amount of the royal tour. I know it's obviously hard to avoid. But we were talking last week before we started recording our podcast about the fact that we haven't heard from the Duchess. She's given no speeches. We were kind of asking, questioning how we would feel in her position. I know, Georgie, had a great story from one of your daughters as well.
Yes, well, we had been watching the Invictus Games opening ceremony with our older two kids. They were up for it, and they sort of knew, because people at school have been talking about it, they know that there was a royal tour happening, and they sort of were open to that. And as we were watching the opening ceremony, and we were waiting they knew Prince Harry was going to speak, and my eldest daughter said, well, when will Meghan speak? And I said, oh, well, she won't. And she said, Mum, I think she needs to just step up. Like, what is she going to do? Just not say anything? And I laughed and I sort of thought, yeah, look, it's a valid point. And we did. So she's like, we ended up having quite an in-depth conversation about what being a princess involves and how it might not actually be a particularly appealing position. But then, and I actually haven't checked back in with her to explain that she has on this tour now given a couple of speeches.
She has. Maybe she heard your daughter's advice. So
maybe.
Perhaps your daughter tweeted it somewhere and it caught on.
Look, if she could access social media in that way, she would, I have no doubt.
Yes, so she has spoken. So the first speech was in Fiji and she spoke really passionately about the power of education. She spoke about her own education. She spoke about the need to give other women the opportunities for education, how transformative that can be. And then she's also just spoken in, as we're recording today, she's just spoken in New Zealand to mark the 125th anniversary of women winning the right to vote, and again giving a really passionate speech there and talking about how those women had been the envy of the world, that they were really the inspiration that people looked up to there. So she's kind of stepped it up a lot in the last few days.
She has. My daughter would agree that she has stepped up.
I don't know much about royal protocol, but she's kind of leaving a bit of royal protocol behind.
Yeah, so technically, well, to be fair though, and look, I do have to admit that I am partial to a little bit of royal news coverage.
Yes, that's what we have you for.
I do enjoy that aspect of it. And Prince Harry and the Duchess have actually broken protocol on a number of occasions by doing things as dramatic as holding a mobile phone. That's never been seen before.
I don't understand how that's breaking that's not a tradition because they didn't have mobile phones
that's true.
50 years ago.
That's true. It's again, actually, a lot of these things, that's a good point, because they're apparently not meant to take selfies. They're not actually meant to take photos themselves, which they have actually done a few times. So Prince Harry took a photo of Meghan with one of the young fans, etc. They've hugged members of the public, which again is apparently a break in protocol. But it is protocol that members of the royal family don't talk publicly about politics. And some people were saying that in Meghan's speech last night about feminism, that she has actually sort of veered very close to the political territory, which I say brilliant, because I do feel, the situation between Harry and his wife, is very different to traditional royal history. So she has come from a different country. She's biracial. She's been married before. She's had a successful career herself. She's been an advocate for women, and I suppose her history in that way was why I was a bit disappointed that it seemed like when she was here in Australia that her role was purely symbolic. And look, she looks fabulous in whatever she wears, and I quite enjoy. But
there was no speech in Australia, right?
No, she didn't speak here. And so I was sort of looking at that, thinking just because she has been quite a proud advocate for women, and she's been really passionate about the empowerment of women. So I do feel relieved that she has, these last few days actually made some substantive speeches, and I think that her role there is potentially quite powerful, because I think you can't deny the public reach that these particular members of the royal family have. And I think, frankly, I like it when anyone speaks about feminism and sort of opening up what the rights of women are and putting a spotlight on that issue. So I'm happy that she sort of delved into that territory.
Yeah, okay. And the royal tour continues. It's pretty much wrapped up, but there might be... New Zealand's her last stop.
And then they are heading back.
Okay. Maybe next time we'll get something in Australia.
I did see something that made me laugh, though. It said they're heading back and then she'll settle in before she has the baby. And I'm like, okay, so you don't actually settle down for like 5 months before you give birth. You don't actually... go into confinement. It's like chances are she might actually continue on her daily life until she delivers the baby.
I know. And I wrote about this last week, this idea of the fact that it came out and said that part of some of her duties were scaled back. And unfortunately for the majority, the vast majority of women, you don't really scale back. Whether you're working or not working, you might have toddlers at home, you might have things to do in the house, you've got jobs, you can't really scale back. Hopefully you can scale back to the point at which it might be detrimental to your health or to your pregnancy. And the New York Times again had a great story about this going on in the US, where the laws are just not that robust in terms of protecting pregnant women.
No, then it's
from and taking on risky jobs. But at the end of the day, you can't really scale back. But I do feel for the Duchess in the sense that every outfit that she's wearing is being scrutinised for growing evidence of the baby bump. So that just couldn't be too fun.
Well, actually, and you know, it's funny. I was at a cafe working earlier this morning, and there was a man a couple of tables down, and I don't even know how this came up, but he said to the waitress after he'd ordered his coffee, he goes, "God, they took a bad photo of Meghan yesterday, didn't they?" I thought, oh, good Lord, like, you don't really, to me, look like you'd be the most photographic, individual on the planet. But why are you even... And I did think to myself, you would not... That level of scrutiny would just be horrendous to live with. I mean, most pregnant... Well, when you've been pregnant, it's a very unusual time for your body. You're very... All things are happening. You're not exactly sure. It doesn't really quite feel like your own anymore. You're growing a little person that's taking over.
So would you take the CEO role of AMP over the pregnant princess role?
Ooh, that's hard. See, because I've always thought that...
You wanted to give being a princess a try.
Well, I'd like a little try. Yeah. I mean, I've always thought it would be nice to have so many people to help you.
It would. Okay, so finally we'll get to our recommendations for the week. I've got a few books to talk about, Georgie, but let's start with you. Last week you recommended Lego.
Which was widely panned, I have to say.
Yeah, including by me. So any recommendations this week?
Well, I've got a confession to make. This week has been a big week in our household. We have, for the very first time in history, come to the current day and age where we have got a smart TV.
Okay.
That actually has Netflix built into it. This is a big... Okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is big for us. And so we have been watching a bit of Netflix to make... we have previously watched Netflix, but on our laptop. So this is a new thing. We've started, like everybody else, probably The Bodyguard, which is a BBC Netflix combination, and it's very compelling. But the other thing that I've watched, which I was obsessed with, is the Kelly Lane 3-part series that the ABC has done.
Yeah.
Caro Meldrum Hanna and Elise Worthington are the two reporters.
I watched all of that as well.
The 3-part series on, I think it's called Exposed, the case of Kelly Lane.
It's on ABC.
On ABC. And I actually watched it all on iView. We watched the 3 in a row, 3 nights in a row. And I am just fascinated. I would love to know the answer.
I know, me too. So I mean, hopefully that investigation, they had so many comments. They'd opened up a Facebook group afterwards, so it looks like they will.
Yeah, that's the thing.
They could
that
make
night,
some progress.
When we finished watching the third episode, I discovered that there was this Facebook group, and I said to my husband,
and that was
he was like,
the evening.
"I don't think I'm ever going to see you again." And I was like, "It's possible that you will not." And the deep dive of data and details about the flats and the times of it is fascinating.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you don't know, Kelly Lane is a Sydney woman who's actually serving time in jail. She was convicted of murdering a baby that she had, Tegan, whose whereabouts have never been confirmed. So it's Kelly maintains that she gave the baby to the father of the child after 2 days after giving birth, but the baby has never been found. The partner has never been found.
And it's very unusual to be convicted of murder without a body.
It is really unusual. Yeah, no,
definite figure there.
There definitely have been cases where that has happened before. There was quite a high-profile case in Queensland where that's happened, but it is really unusual. And as the ABC team have uncovered, there were all sorts of sort of anomalies in the legal case, and I mean even the judge himself who presided it, he sort of said he had real misgivings about the verdict, and anyway, it's really worthwhile watching, and I'm absolutely fascinated, and I would love to watch.
Yes,
I'd love to
it is
know
excellent.
The full story.
I think, and I did it each week. I did it the traditional way, so it is there on iView, so you can watch all 3 episodes. So there's so many books out at the moment by Australian authors, and they keep coming across our desks, and we will dive further into them on Women's Agenda, and we will hopefully get some of these authors in for interviews as well. But a few weeks back, I recommended Lee Sowers' Any Ordinary Day, which again is just brilliant. Please go and read it. And I saw that it is the number one best. It's number one on the bestseller list at the moment. So really, really good book.
Quite the overachiever, really.
She is. Yeah, let's not talk about that. Okay. So, but the other book, so I haven't been able to read these yet, but I want to talk about them. So Anne Summers' memoir is out, and I have the book, and I flicked through the photographs in the centre as you do, which was really interesting. So I can't wait to get stuck into that. And Gillian Triggs's biography is out. So her book is called Speaking Up, and she's had this really extraordinary life, living all over the world, her amazing career in law, raising, I think, 4 children, and obviously then later on becoming the president of the Australian Human Rights Commission and everything that came with that. And Claire Wright, historian, she has published You Daughters of Freedom. And I think it's crazy to think that the rest of the world wants to look to Australia for inspiration when it comes to, and that was since white women won the right to vote in 1902, and so she talks about that period after that as well. And we've published a piece by Claire today, which questions if some of those women back then may have been now, rolling in their graves basically at what's going on in politics right now. And the other one on the list is Lauren Jackson. So completely different, but another biography, A Life in Basketball and Beyond. So really looking forward to getting stuck into that.
Yes, all great women there.
Any final thoughts on any female authors or other books? Or?
No, I need to get into a couple of books. I've been neglecting. I go through phases where I sort of can't not read, and then but I've had a few weeks where I haven't read anything, and I need to pick something up.
Well, let's get stuck into there. So that is everything. So thank you once again. And a reminder that we do publish every day. Just go to womensagenda.com.au.
That's a wrap for Talk It Out, the Women's Agenda podcast, powered by Eagle Waves Radio. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and jump on the website for more amazing shows. Catch you next time.